the great privileges of working at DataCorps is that we get to work with very personal data. And it's very important to remember that before we just happily visualize things or throw them through an SVM, that all of these data points represent people, real people, families, hopes, dreams, fears, and that's something that we take incredibly seriously. So lest you think that we're just throwing these rows and columns through the grinders of the machine to just get some pretty graphs, we think a lot about what that means, how we even got to that data point from the world that we live in, and how the conclusions that we draw and that the volunteers draw could be interpreted and used in the world. So I think those are very important things to know that we hold very dearly, and we hope that you guys hold very dearly as well in hearing about these things. With that, I will also say the fantastically interesting findings, especially around the geography of how people talk, and of course, once again, another takeaway that the challenges often lie in the data themselves. In fact, something mentioned that for all the timestamps in these posts, you'd be reading through and see the time that things were posted, and then all of a sudden, the word today. Not helpful. So once again, a fun learning lesson about the joys of data. And with that, I want to bring us to our last learning lesson of the night. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite up Brian Abelson and Kush Varshni, who worked with GiveDirectly. And I'll call out at the front that we're very honored to have GiveDirectly's COO, Joy Sun, who's a partner in this project back here. So thank you, Joy, for all your work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kush and Brian. Give it up for Kush and Brian.
So we're going to be tag teaming this. Alright, so just to give you an idea of GiveDirectly, so it's an NGO whose mission is to give unconditional cash transfers to the extremely poor, and they're currently operating in Kenya and Uganda. So they do this using mobile telephony. So the idea is oftentimes for poor people, charities kind of think for themselves that maybe this person needs a cow or needs food or needs whatever sort of provisions. But the idea here is that money is transferred directly to the recipient, and they're free to do whatever they wish with it. Basically, whatever will help them improve their lives the best. So GiveDirectly takes an end-to-end approach in terms of their operations. So they don't subcontract anything. So they take care of every step of the process. And because of that, they're able to give essentially 90% of donations directly to the recipients, which is a lot higher than most charities. So a key step in their operations is actually finding those where those poor people are, because in order to give money to the poor people, you need to find them. So in terms of GiveDirectly's operations, this means finding the villages in which are the poorest in the certain region that they're operating. So basically, these countries don't have village-level poverty data available. So what we want to do is actually estimate this from any data sources that we have possible. And it turns out the one indicator of poverty level in Kenya and Uganda, where GiveDirectly is currently operating, is the type of roof that a person lives under. So let me hand it off to Brian.
Yeah. So before GiveDirectly came to DataKind, they would go out to these villages and they would take censuses and note what type of roof that each house they visited had. So you can see a thatched roof and a metal roof. And at the same time, they would also take the coordinates of these houses so that they could verify after the fact, was this house really a thatched roof house? Was this house really a metal roof house? And using those coordinates, we can actually look it up in Google and see quite clearly the difference between a thatched roof house on the left and then a metal roof house. When there's no cloud coverage, you see this bright lit up white steel roof. And when Kush and I came to the project, we thought right away, this is something that's really well suited for machine learning. We can say very simply yes or no, is this house thatched or is this house a metal roof? So that was sort of our approach, that we would use image processing techniques and machine learning to estimate both at an image level how many houses are in this image, and then how many metal and thatched houses are in this image, and then be able to aggregate those at the level of a village. And then the sort of outcome would be a list of villages with the proportion of thatched versus steel roofs, and that would help GiveDirectly figure out which villages to target first. So one of the sort of biggest challenges here was to train this model. And this sort of constituted two different challenges. One, we had to be able to look at an image and say, within that image, where is a house? And then once we located the house, we would have to say, is that house a thatched roofed house, or is that house an iron roofed house? So to facilitate that process, we built this application that volunteers could use online to simply click on houses in an image, and then those coordinate positions would be recorded in a database so that we could go back and train a model to learn both where houses were and what type of houses those were. And this is actually a great testament to how amazing the DataKind community is, because we put out a call on DataKind's website on a Wednesday to find some people to help out label. I think it was about 1,500 images, and the following Monday I woke up and I found that my site that I put up for people to label images had crashed, and I was like, oh my god, this whole thing was a waste. And it turns out the reason it crashed was that they had labeled all the images, and I had never foreseen the problem of all of the images being labeled. So much credit to DataKind and Shuba and their amazing volunteers. So that was sort of the first step, and then Kush will talk about how he harnessed that data to actually create a model.
Yeah, and I think some of our crowd labelers might be in the crowd, so yeah, let's thank them again. So yeah, once we have people doing this, we also want the computer to find the houses and figure out whether they're metal or thatched. So one image processing technique that we used was template matching. So the idea is you start off with an image and a very small piece of what you think looks like a roof, and you scan it over the entire image. And wherever the underlying image matches your template, you get a strong response. So the black and reddish areas in the middle image here. Once we threshold that, we get this image on the right, which is basically a very good estimate of where these houses are. And if we take the centroids of these connected components down here, we can figure out fairly well where the roofs are. So then, once we have those roofs, we also want to label them thatched versus metal. So it's actually, the colors are quite different. So up top and below, we have two color distributions of the average thatched roof and the average metal roof. And you can see the distributions are quite different from each other. So we can train a model to distinguish between them. So once we have all these things, these features and the crowd labels and everything, we can train a predictive model. And then that learned predictive model will estimate two quantities. One is the total number of roofs in an image patch, and the other is the proportion of metal roofs in that image patch. So then once we have that predictive model, then we can score a bunch of new images from that same region. So in this part of Kenya that we first tried it, there were 50,000 image patches that we scored using the predictive model to produce these heat map sort of things of those two quantities. So these are some maps showing those results. So the one on the right or left, or whichever one, the red one, is the number of roofs per image patch. So where we see a very white or yellowish area, that's where there's a lot of houses. And this corresponds with the knowledge that we have, because that middle part, yellow part, is actually where there's the main town of that region. And then on the right, we have the estimate of the proportion that are metal. So there's kind of browner parts, which are more rural, and the whiter parts that are more urban, which correspond to more metal roofs as well. So then the next step is to aggregate these heat maps to obtain village-level metal roof proportion. So this is the result, basically the final result that we want to produce. And the boundaries here are village-level boundaries, which was a whole process into itself of trying to get the boundaries because no one really had data for Kenya at the village level. So once we aggregate, we obtain this kind of ranking of these villages where the darkest ones, the brownest ones, are the ones where GiveDirectly wants to focus their attention on. So that's the general idea. And the accuracy for this sort of estimate with using cross-validation, if we report it as absolute percentage error for percentage thatched, it's around 3% or 4%, so it's a fairly good estimate. So what we did then is we piloted this in February to select 50 villages in Kenya. So this was GiveDirectly's largest campaign so far. And this resulted, so those 50 villages received in total $4 million approximately in cash transfers. And the data-driven approach that we came up with saved around 100 person days of manual effort. So it resulted in quite a bit of savings there. So to wrap up, so now we're in the process of using this for village selection in Uganda, and the operational efficiency that we put in should allow GiveDirectly to scale out much faster. And just a general point about remote sensing, so there are many applications for social good, just beyond finding the poverty policies and so on. So just to wrap up, so Joy is here, and we also want to thank Carolina and Biali, who are both in Africa, who helped us along the way and used the outputs that we produced, and all the DataCorps folks as well. So thanks.
Give it up for Christian, Brian, and Joy. Awesome work, guys. Are there any DataCorps labelers in the house? Raise your hand. Any DataCorps labelers from this project? That's okay. They're off somewhere on the internet crashing. Oh, was there one? Yeah. Give it up for the DataCorps labelers. Seem like awesome good people. So this is, I mean, just a fantastic project. As you can tell, I was super impressed, as Brian pointed out, that it crashed his labeler because so many people had labeled images. He never thought about how to set it up so it could go beyond when it was out of images. So that was great, and I mean, just what I really take away from all of these projects is that everybody who came onto these projects basically became grad students. Jump in, spend late nights looking at data, dealing with data headaches. And what you may not know is that all these people then had to write reports for their nonprofits, work with them, hang out with them. In fact, the GiveDirectly team actually wrote an academic paper that they submitted to KDD. So they actually literally became grad students. I think they have extra degrees now just for doing this project, which I think is great. But one other thing I want to really just point out here that I think is so awesome is that all of these projects live beyond just what the teams did here. Whether it's the mission continues using skills that they can use to analyze other surveys, or whether it's GiveDirectly using satellite imagery techniques that can work for other groups, Medic Mobile using it for other public health, Thorn using it for other text analysis, for other trafficking needs. All of these go beyond just the awesomeness of these one projects and become tools that can be used by others. And I think that is incredibly cool. So I want to just have you guys give it up one more time for all the data ambassadors.